Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Maria, and I welcome you here to the Women in Energy seminar today. I thank you for joining us, and I will be hosting this session. Myself, I'm a visiting researcher at Imperial College London at the moment, and I'm joined by Rebecca Rosling, who is head of Future Energy Systems R&D at EDF. Rebecca has been working at EDF for many years in multiple different roles, and she's also chairing the Women's Network at EDF. And so we therefore think she has plenty of experiences and guidance she can share with us today. She currently leads a team of research engineers innovating EDF's purpose of helping UK achieve net zero, with focus areas including heat, decarbonisation of mobility, storage and flexibility, and hydrogen. Rebecca has also previously been the head of energy market and credit risk and head of portfolio management at EDF Energy. I will now hand over to Rebecca, who can talk a little bit more about her experience in the energy industry. Up to you.
Hi everybody, and thank you to Maria and Louise for the invitation to talk to you today. EDF has worked with Imperial for quite a few years now, and I've definitely been around the campus a few times, so it's nice to get a chance to talk on a bit more of a personal level. So I joined, so to go back in time, I did a maths degree at Cambridge, and I guess when I graduated I was trying to think what to do next. I think obviously this was pre-financial, well maybe not obviously, but it was pre-financial crisis, and certainly the city was hiring maths graduates pretty aggressively, and also I definitely thought about kind of finance, whether it's accounting or more kind of investment banking, and also, like most maths graduates, was certainly getting kind of people wanting to recruit us as coders, but neither of those quite worked for me at the time, and I don't think I could ever quite put my finger on why I was interested in energy. At that point, the energy market, however, was just opening up, and it seemed to me to be a place that had some of the features of financial markets that kind of interest me and my geeky side, but also had much more kind of real meaning, and it's a real commodity that we need financial systems. I wouldn't knock that, but people really need energy, and they need it every day. And that definitely appealed more to me than the purely kind of financial motivation of city jobs. So I joined EDF Energy at the time. Actually at the time it's called London Electricity, but I joined their graduate training scheme. It was a very different company to what it was at the moment. So EDF basically the market had just been liberalised, and had done a little bit of consolidating. So there were 7 or 8 former supply companies that were expanding to be more kind of integrated market operators. So EDF had been bought about a year ago by EDF in France. So London Electricity had just been bought by EDF in France, and had also just bought its first few power stations. So I think at the time I joined, they probably owned 2 coal stations, and maybe they just bought a gas station. I can't remember exactly. So it was quite an exciting time, I guess. It was very new. The market was really just developing. It was about, again, there'd been quite a lot of turmoil, I suppose, in that some of the players like Enron and some others at the time had just gone bankrupt, and they'd come in and clearly tried to run as really like financial institutions, and perhaps lost a bit of track of the purpose of energy and what it was for. So it was an interesting time. I think we can talk a bit maybe later about the female side of that. Certainly, trading floor was a very male-dominated place, and there were certainly things that happened that I wouldn't expect any of you to have to put up with in your careers, or at least I very much hope you wouldn't. But it was really interesting. So I did various kind of analysis roles, so kind of analyst, senior analyst. Mostly on that kind of optimization side, so looking at with a coal station in particular, you've really got an option, and you want to run it on a purely commercial basis. You want to run it when power prices are higher than coal prices, and not when it's not. And it's obviously more complicated than that, because you've got startup costs and all the rest of it. then I think EDF has, so I always say I feel like I've worked for at least 3 different companies, and a few in 2008 or thereabouts. So I took a career break, which was very nice. And but at the same time, EDF was acquiring British Energy, which at the time operated the nuclear fleet in the UK. And also at the same time sold its networks company, so sold all the wires, which was a bit of a consequent, a bit of cash raising exercise because the nuclear fleet was expensive, and that really massively shifted the kind of focus of the company, and it really exposed us to completely new risks, new things that we had to manage commercially as well. So I'm not talking about the technical risks of running a nuclear fleet, because obviously we didn't just buy the fleet, we bought the whole business, we bought the safety experts, we bought all the process experts, but also the how do you manage that commercially in the market, and in particular from a kind of hedging strategy perspective. So that was when I got my first manager role as portfolio hedging manager, really responsible for bringing to making sure that we buy and sell the right amounts of power and gas for our customers, and buy and sell the right amounts of power generated by our power stations, and the coal that we needed when at the time we had coal stations, and the carbon certificates that we needed. And we did that. We bought the right amounts, we bought it at the right time, and generally energy markets are liquid or functional for around 3 years. So you've got a kind of almost infinite, well, completely infinite numbers of trajectories you can take for when you want to lock in your revenue by selling the power, for example, from nuclear. And that's a huge challenge in particular, because we never know how much is going to generate, because they have faults, they go offline, they need to be maintained. So that was a huge challenge, and really quite a big cultural change for the company. So I did that for a few years, took on loads of interesting projects, and kind of moved up the ranks a little bit, I suppose, on that commercial side of the business. So worked as head of portfolio management, where I had some of my old responsibilities, and also some demand forecasting and renewable energy forecasting responsibility. Did some work in finance and project management, and then I'll stop in a minute and we can have more of a discussion. And then 3 or 4 years ago, I moved to R&D, which was a massive change, huge kind of imposter syndrome, as I was suddenly managing a team of engineers who were all doing these very interesting projects. And it was hard for me at the beginning to work out what I was really adding, but then I kind of realised that what I was bringing was the commercial perspective, the real world perspective, the customer focus, the understanding how things actually worked. And it's been really, really fun. I've been doing that for 4 years now, and really enjoyed all of it. And here I am. And I guess you also mentioned I lead the Women's Network, but maybe we can talk about that a bit later.
Yes, perfect. Yeah, thank you very much, Rebecca. I had the chance to meet you beforehand in preparation, and I think this covered very well your extensive and very diverse or various roles you've covered and taken different angles within the same company. And well, you already highlighted different topics that we can come back to. And I think I initially would start a bit with asking you to elaborate a bit more on your current role, like to understand. But because also I mean, I also work in industry, but I still don't know exactly what you're doing, how you, what topics you're covering, what priorities are. So yeah, that would be my first question. And then I would also like everyone, or to encourage everyone to ask questions they are interested in. They can be very career focused. They can be also very general about the energy sector if you're not here to have a good orientation in it. This is your chance to ask questions, and otherwise Rebecca and I just going to have a conversation.
Yeah, very, very keen to get a variety of questions. Don't promise to answer everything, but nothing's off limits, that's for sure. So I guess what my role is at the moment. So I've got a team of between 20 and 25. It varies a little bit. Research engineers. So I've got three managers, and then they all manage researchers. So my job title is Head of Future Energy Systems. And sometimes in a way it's easiest to talk about what we don't do. So there is another team that looks at nuclear R&D. There's another team that looks at renewables R&D, specifically offshore wind, but also kind of onshore wind and solar. And my team does more or less everything else. So everything else that's really driven, as you said at the beginning, by our kind of purpose of decarbonisation and net zero. So I've got a team that's very focused on end use decarbonisation. So heat in particular, which I'm sure everyone on the call probably knows is a huge challenge to decarbonise, not partly on the technical side, but also on the kind of commercial side, the customer journey side. So, you know, we have to, on the domestic front at least, we have to persuade an awful lot of people, 90%, and I should know the number and I don't, but a huge number of people in the UK have got gas boilers or oil-fired central heating if they're in a rural area maybe, and we need to persuade them all to either get a heat pump, some other form of electric heating, or potentially some hydrogen might be the answer for some. So that's a huge challenge. I think what my team doesn't do is develop heat pump technologies, but what we do is develop things to improve the ability of EDF and its partners to roll out heat pumps to as many people as possible, and to look at what are the other options we should be giving our customers. So example project we've done there is to develop a digital kind of customer journey for heat pumps to make it much easier to go through the process of sizing and installing a heat pump for the customer. So with the intent of moving it from a kind of 3 or 4 month process to something that'll be, you know, more like 1 or 2 weeks. And we know that that's really important, because if someone's boiler breaks, they're not waiting 4 months to have hot water and heating again. So that's a massive challenge for the business and for the country. So as well as that, on the end use decarbonisation side, we've also got a load of electric vehicle stuff. So that is really an interesting thing, because I'd say 4 or 5 years ago, or certainly when I joined the team, EVs felt like a bit of an R&D project. We were doing some trials, we were trying to come up with some tools, similar kind of thing. And it's now much more mainstream. And I think, you know, you don't have to, you presumably you all live in or around London, you only have to walk down a street, and sometimes I kind of entertain myself by counting how many cars are electric that drive past me, and it's pretty high proportion now. So there, I think it's about, again, identifying the barriers, also developing new kind of business models, and I think that brings me on to the other real priority of that part of my team, which at the moment is flexibility. So I think that's really been turbocharged in the last few years. My team have been doing flexibility projects for a while, and now they're everywhere, and it's definitely making that step from being an R&D topic to a real life topic. And it's really challenging, really interesting. I think the technologies are there, more or less. You know, I get people come to me all the time with, we've got this home energy management system, we've got this thing, we've got this kind of domestic battery. Our job is to kind of bring that all together and to work out how we can really drive that forward for customers, because people, again, they don't want to spend a lot of time thinking about when to run their washing machine or when to run their dishwasher. We need to make that easy for you. So that's one part of my team, as I said, very focused on end use decarbonisation. I've got a very modelling focused part of my team, half of whom went to Imperial, I think, who are really optimisation experts. So they have done a lot of work building optimisation algorithms for batteries, but again, then they're getting much more into that flexibility side as well. And then the newest part of my team is called Zero Carbon Hubs, who work a lot on hydrogen projects, how we can produce hydrogen using nuclear electricity, nuclear heat, renewable electricity, also e-fuels. So what can we do with the hydrogen, and to really support industry in decarbonising. And they're also growing their activity on direct air capture. I guess maybe what I should have said at the beginning, and then I'll stop talking, see if there's any questions, but is, you know, our role is to support EDF business units and to support us, help EDF help Britain achieve net zero, I suppose. So what we don't is a kind of a blank sheet to do everything we want. We can do some exploratory things, but I think what really motivates me is making sure that the things we do are something that really affects the performance of the live business within the next year or two. Certainly that should be 80% of our work, and maybe the remaining 20% is that more kind of preparing the future activity. So yeah, it's a fun job.
Yes, and I think it well, seeing the priorities that you have at the moment, they're also tackling the key challenges where you at the power provider side, you are saying we're decarbonizing already a lot, and now it's really also on the consumer to make choices. And so it comes down to the individual level, which is, for example, for heating or also vehicles, the major challenge. And I think for me, also having a technical background, I really like the angle of the end user, focusing on how to make the journey nice for the end user, because that's how adoption will be more enabled. Yeah. And because you mentioned,
and I think it's interesting if you look at like the decarbonisation, and Britain has done an awful lot of decarbonisation. I guess my career journey kind of reflects that, in that I spent a lot of time working with coal stations at the beginning and probably a bit of gas, and now EDF doesn't have any fossil generation at all in the UK. We've only got, nuclear and renewables. But I think all of that has happened without consumers needing to do very much. Yeah. And we're now at the limit of what we can do as an industry without consumers helping. And I think that really brings us into a new phase. So it's not, government basically put in one policy, which was a carbon tax that pretty effectively shifted generation from coal to gas, which had a huge impact. That reduced emissions from the electricity sector by 2/3. And then now moving from gas to renewables, they can do that with centralised policies. But that bit about getting people to change their habits, you need to have the right technical solutions, but you need to have the right, you need for customers. People can't expect decarbonisation to be something that happens to them in the way that it has been so far.
Yeah. Agreed. And I think here, actually, the questions link in very nicely that came in. So we have one, because you mentioned now how the technologies have changed and basically going from coal to renewables and other solutions. So Laura was asking, what do you think, which technologies will be at the forefront in the future, and on which technologies might it be worth focusing on and specializing in? Like, where do you, and it links a bit to my question, is perhaps also where do you see a gap in like skills or knowledge?
That's a very broad question. So I think I think it's always what we need more and more is people who can connect the dots. So which perhaps isn't the answer that you're looking for, but I think that kind of flexibility and the ability to perhaps be an expert in one technology, but pivot and take that expertise another technology is going to be the really sought after people in the future. So I can say to you, look at the hydrogen economy, it's basically 0 terawatt hours a year now, or 1 terawatt hour maybe in the UK, all of which is coming from gas basically. So it's not zero carbon hydrogen. And in 10 years time, that should be 100, 200 hours. So, hydrogen is important, but I think it's interesting to see a lot of the people who are going to, in the existing workforce, are going to be oil and gas engineers that make that pivot, but some of them won't. And I think that the people who are successful are going to be the people who build an expertise, maybe in hydrogen, maybe in batteries, maybe in heat pumps, but can keep an eye on the bigger picture, and therefore be able to address different things. So I think, net zero is so complicated. I've done my spiel about all the different things my team do. I could also talk about nuclear and the role that's going to have. Clearly, the government's all governments actually, all major political parties are very committed to Britain's nuclear renaissance. Those will always be good, but good skills to have. but I think everything's becoming more complicated. So I think most nuclear plants will probably be co-located or will do some kind of cogeneration with maybe hydrogen, maybe direct air capture, maybe district heating. So there's people who can integrate different technologies, bring them all together. I think that they will have the world at their feet.
Yeah, I think actually, yeah, as how your answer evolved, I would really agree. Like also coming from a background of energy systems optimization, having the chance, having 4 years in my PhD looking at the whole system, I think, and also now working on a particular angle of it, you see that they are all interconnected. There's not one single solution. There's not going to be one technology that's going to answer all, like tailored to all the demands in one of the sectors. And I think, and I see that often, and also in the communication, it's very important to connect it to other evolutions, like how mobility changes, the flexibility they deliver, how about flexibility of heat pumps, etc. Like you see an interconnected picture is really important. While I would also agree that the very technical knowledge can be advantageous, at least to have some solidity in some of the technical, knowing how a heat pump works, how I don't know, an electrolyzer works, etc. Like a good fundamental technical understanding is very helpful to see through some of the claims, I think.
Yeah, but I think it's a brilliant industry to join now. I mean, like I've enjoyed it for 20 years, but I think it's now, it's so important for the world, and it's, you know, that there's no way that it won't be a growing sector, I suppose.
Before I would dive into again a broader question, I think I just want to honor Mukta's question on the R&D side of what you're doing and also the forecasting tools. So because you mentioned that you you yourself focus on demand and renewable forecasting, but in general, she was wondering how the demand forecasting has changed over the years, and if you're using new methods like machine learning or generative AI, like how those new topics link into what you're doing in the forecasting space at EDF.
Yeah, it's so I'm not. It was a few jobs ago that I was in charge of demand forecasting, but actually my team does support that team a bit now, and literally got a workshop on Monday to talk about that specific topic. So I think with demand forecasting, there's always lots of different things that different people mean by it. I think what's very important for us commercially is to have the best possible forecast for tomorrow and for 2 hours time. And the way the electricity market works is that trading is done on half-hour blocks, and ultimately the amount you end up with a penalty for every megawatt you're out of balance for a given half-hour block. So that, I think there is real scope. There's definitely some kind of relatively advanced data science as part of that activity at the moment. I think I'm no AI expert or machine learning expert, but my understanding of it is, I don't think it's a particularly well-defined thing, as in, I don't think you can say, oh yeah, today that didn't have AI and now it does. But clearly it's a topic that I think will evolve hugely over the next few years, both in the short term demand forecasting and then also in the longer term, which is, you know, when you're building a wind farm, it's good to have some idea what its 15-year output is likely to do, which is obviously much harder because there's all the climate change uncertainty as well. But I think it's a very good question, and the answer is yes, it's evolving very fast. We're already pretty good at it, but I think we can always get better, and there could be real kind of game changers out there at the moment. But if you ask me in 2 weeks when I've had my workshop, I'll give you a better answer.
Yeah, I would say we had a bit of an unfortunate timing here, but no, I see it. Yeah. And also, this is also important. I think that in companies, you have still very different departments that are linked, but you have very specialized entities for certain things. And I think forecasting and, for example, high quality data inputs for anything that's modeling, that's often a different department in a company than it is the people using those tools to make the interpretation. Just to also highlight, I think this division of EDF is common amongst others. But perhaps coming back a bit to the headline of our meeting, like women in energy, I was wondering how easy it is to attract female talent actually for your team, because it is heavily like an engineering team as far as I understood. And perhaps also in reflecting on how that has evolved over time, if that is now easier than before, also with other roles that you have had. Sorry.
Yeah. So in my team, we're actually, I haven't checked the numbers precisely recently, but I'd say we're not far off 50-50. And actually the number of talented young women coming through is brilliant. I think that reflects partly that the team is quite, our purpose is so clear about, net zero technologies. And I think that really attracts, well, very talented people. I'm very, very, very proud of my team. They're all brilliant. But also, perhaps it's a, I don't know, maybe that does or doesn't attract some of the best female talent, but it seems to. I think also, obviously, that the cliche of, people see people like me in management roles. They see, one of my in fact, I've just appointed a female manager to one of the teams. And I think that it does create a momentum. I'd say in the broader EDF, we certainly haven't cracked it on gender. I think, we've got some very stable business units, nuclear, especially, they're quite specialist skills, and there's probably, the towns that have nuclear stations in, the nuclear station may be the biggest employer in the area. So I guess what that means is that you have a very stable workforce. So that's a very difficult ship to turn, if you see what I mean. You can't sack 200 nuclear personnel and appoint 200 females overnight. It doesn't work like that. You have to kind of grow in that talent. So they are really committed to doing that. The latest, I think, apprentice scheme has had a pretty good gender balance. Some of the graduate engineers that come in are really good. So they are really, really trying to improve the number of women, but there is clearly still an issue. What that also means is that the women, because the junior employees are much more balanced than the senior ones, there is a kind of an imbalance there, but it's moving in the right direction. I think, my role in the Women's Network, one of the things I really want to do is create space where maybe if someone is the only female on the boiler team at their station, they at least can talk to other women on a daily basis, rather than create that network outside their own station if they don't have enough women role models within their station, because there are some brilliant people, and there have been for decades, brilliant women at those senior levels, but there just aren't enough of them on the engineering side.
Agreed.
But the commitment is there. The senior commitment is there. The director of nuclear is my Women's Network sponsor, and he's very, very supportive and wants to listen to us as well about how we can make changes.
Yes, I definitely see also that it is a concerted effort, in a sense that you want to have a transition. I think it's also very apparent to everyone else that there is an inequality, like not the diversity, and also and so people see the problem and they also want to address it, but of course you need to keep people on board while it is. So if you would kick out everyone else and replace them by a female force, I don't think you would have the support and also the necessary team spirit in the company. Like, so the transition needs to be, how to say, it needs to be forced in some way, but not alienating any other groups, etc. So it is a balance that you need to strike. And I think also what you mentioned in the beginning is also that you have female head of teams and managers. And I think I was always surprised, or like I found it a correlation that, for example, in research, you also would see that if there was a female professor, she would often have a higher share of female employees or like employees, students associated with them. Like, so I think it changes, as you mentioned, to have those role models or just have an example of yourself in such a role. And that actually links to
and I think,
sorry,
just on that point, so one of the things we do as a Women's Network is arrange sessions not a million miles from this, where we get, women across the business to talk about a day in the life. And I think what always strikes me is people are always willing to be asked. We've not yet asked anyone who said, no, not interested. I think, women across the company and probably across society, 99% of them are really keen to support other women develop.
Yeah.
I think that's nice.
Yes, and I think, however, it is also always an active approach. Like, you need to, like, how to say, no one will come to you in order to develop you. That's often not the case, because people have enough on their agenda.
Absolutely.
So it's up to you initiate it. But as you say, like I think I've only experienced open doors, especially if you're just curious and open, if you don't have all the expectations. And it actually links to a question that Catriona was asking, if like equality, diversity, and inclusion is one of the key values at EDF, and perhaps linking to that, how you implement it, for example, through the women's networks or other initiatives.
Yeah, so I mean, yes, it is. I think so. What our kind of key strapline has been for the last few years, this isn't me that came up with it, but I think it's great, is this everyone's welcome idea. So I think, you know, obviously there's the kind of protected characteristics, you know, gender, race, sexuality, disability, things like that, where we have a kind of a legal obligation. But I think what's really become clear in the last few years is that stuff is really important, and we can't lose the focus on that, because, as I said, we're not where we want to be on gender, we're not completely where we want to be on race, although again big improvements, but there's a lot more to it than that. It's about everyone feeling that they can come to work and be themselves. So for example, there's just been a neurodiversity kind of mini network set up as well, and we run lots of really kind of interesting talks and things like that on that. And I think there is an increasing understanding that it's not just something you do because it's the right thing, although it is and you should, but teams are so much stronger when you've got diverse groups of people in. So it's like, I don't want to say that everything's rosy and everything's perfect. We're a very big company. You know, you've got 12,000 employees. Most of them are really nice. Clearly, there are some that will have, you know, old-fashioned attitudes or whatever, but I think they are increasingly in the minority, and increasingly the culture doesn't kind of allow that. Excuse me. So I guess what we do, and I think what's important is that although we have employees networks, we have the women's network that I chair, we have a race network, disability network, I think there's 9 altogether, but it's a management responsibility. It's not something that managers can say, okay, I've got an ED&I department, they can do all that, I just get on and do my job. And it's not like that. It's a really key leadership responsibility, and my role as a network chair is to keep people, well, as I say, my primary goal is actually to support the women, to help us recruit more women, help them get the right development opportunities, help inspire them, help connect them, all that kind of thing, but also a little bit to be the voice of our members a little bit and hold the feet to the fire sometimes if there are managers who I don't think are doing a lot, and just to shine a light on things, because people don't always know what marginalised groups kind of might experience. And yeah, it's not always easy in a big company, but it is. I feel if you'd asked me that 10 years ago, I would have said, yes, look, you can see it on our annual report, but I feel like the real meaningful commitment is there now in a way that perhaps it hasn't always been.
Yes. Yeah, and then also I think that those bodies, like as you mentioned, those networks, it's really important, as it's your role to put it back on the table, because everyone has so much on their table in their everyday work to just do their work, that something that might fall behind, but it's important that they're like reminders, and also perhaps building the understanding what value it brings to the person, like it, not to see it as a burden, but really actually as a chance to also shape the teams differently and create different solutions you wouldn't have if you all, for example, also a simple example would be to recruit all from the same school and all the same type of backgrounds, that you would get all the homogeneous solutions. Yeah,
exactly. And we had our Women's Network conference just about 3 weeks ago, and our theme there was diversity for net zero, and we had lots of really interesting speakers and panels just talking about how we need to, how it's an absolute non-negotiable for net zero. Like if all we have is a few voices around the room, I touched earlier on some of the challenges, you're never going to get there if all you have is a few voices. And I think there's a really important point as well around needing to understand your customers, and if you don't have women, or all you've got is people who've had a lot of money all their life designing propositions, how is that going to work for people who are experiencing a day-to-day life that you don't understand?
Yeah, that's true.
You could say the same for politicians, of course, but I won't go into that.
No, but yeah, I think that clearly underlined your point. And I was wondering how actually networks have shaped your career. Have you made use of networks? Have you actively sought to build them? Or is it something that for you always evolved naturally through the different roles that you held? Like, what's your approach to a network, basically?
I'd say it's evolved. I think I'd say anything described as a networking event still makes me come out in a cold sweat. I think I'm not a natural schmoozer, if I'm going to be, some people are very good at that kind of thing, and I'm not naturally good at it. What I am good at is building good relationships with people that I work with, or I meet and to talk about a specific topic and that kind of thing. So my network has evolved. If I had my time again, I'd probably have worked on it more actively when I was younger. I think, to be honest, I just didn't have the confidence that I never knew why anyone would want to talk to me. And I think the younger generation are much better at that than we were, certainly. But I think now I am much more confident in myself about going to talk to people and assuming that they would find something I've got to say of interest. And I've kind of managed to retrain my brain a bit when I see the word networking event and think, oh, it's just an opportunity to meet some people and it'll be fine.
Yes, I think I have always a different approach to it, but I think now I would see that it's also responsibility of the other person to be interested in you. I think networking is only flourishes if another person shows interest. You're not there to sell you. It's more about finding a human connection, and then it's enjoyable. But if it's only about getting a card, I think that has no value for either of the two parties, because you don't even know when to address this person with which question if you don't understand where they come from and what they're looking for. So it depends also what you mean with network. If it's a purely schmoozing event, I think it's for certain type of characters, but perhaps not the one who look for a lasting network with insight. I don't know.
And I think it's about putting yourself out there to a certain extent, but for meaningful reasons. So I've got no interest in how many LinkedIn followers I've got or anything like that. But it's, when I want to do a certain project, or I need somebody to support who's an expert in, I don't know, synthetic fuels, do I know where to go to find the right person? And that's internally and externally as well. So I think it's important to think about, as you say, it's that meaningful, not connections for the sake of it, but people where you can come up with a genuine, mutually beneficial relationship.
Yes. Because you mentioned now synthetic fuels, I'm going to do justice to two more questions I didn't ask beforehand, and they're again a bit technical before getting to a career question that I have. But there are two questions, and they're both related to gases, but different ones. So one, Tony was wondering about what challenges you see for hydrogen in the future. I think that's a very common question once one mentions hydrogen. And then the second one is also is from Abisola, and it's about what's your view on the role of natural gas as a transition fuel in the journey to decarbonization. So natural gas and hydrogen as a topic now.
Okay, so good switch. So I'll take the second one first, maybe about the role of natural gas as a transition fuel. And I'd say I wouldn't say a flip-flop exactly on it, but I think we all need to know that we cannot literally stop the gas pipelines flowing tomorrow. I wish we could, but the lights would go off, lots of other things that would happen that ultimately would make it impossible to build the net zero infrastructure that we need. So clearly we need, the oil and gas industry, much though we might not like it, cannot be shut down overnight. Having said that, I think we need to be very, very careful about building new assets investing in new natural gas kind of assets as a transition, because transitionary, I think that is a way of kicking difficult decisions down the curb, and transitionary assets ultimately become permanent assets. And I think that ties back to the hydrogen discussion. A lot of these blue hydrogen facilities, there's a big lobby that says, well, we'll just build them and they'll only need to operate for 20 to 30 years, and then we'll be able to do electrolysis at scale. And I'm just a bit skeptical about that. I think once people have built big facilities, then in 30 years they'll be saying, oh, let's just keep it open a bit longer. Why would you invest in something new? Because you can keep that longer. So I am skeptical about the reality of them being transition fuels, and I think that concerns me. That I don't. Yeah, I'm not delusional. I know that we can't shut down an industry overnight, but I think there needs, the thing to do is to really minimise investment in long term for that.
Yes.
And then I don't know what you think about that, but that's kind of, yeah, it's a difficult one. If it was easy, then I think it would be very,
I think for me over the time, also through my PhD and now, I think one of the how I would approach it is definitely always to hold high the direct electrification flag or banner. Be like, okay, if you can electrify, don't bother going to hydrogen and other derivatives basically from green electricity. But I also do see that perhaps the renewables will change over time, also in scale and location, where then perhaps other solutions may play a role. Like in a sense that you need to capture the large volume of energy that's not readily connected to a grid, etc. But that's a very different time scale. And personally, I agree on your point, or that you need to be careful what is really a transition and what is there to stay and what is just avoiding to make an effort. But then also, of course, you don't just want to delay in some way. Yeah. Perhaps it's more worth also in the technologies that could be an alternative, where you then to make the right incentives and policies to test if they have the capabilities to avoid the whole transitional approach, like the transition fuels. So, but it is I think at the knowledge stand we're at the moment, and also on the how the financials have evolved of those projects, and not having low interest rates anymore, it is more difficult to just try and see. Now you need to be more careful what you choose also. But yeah.
So I definitely think that for me there's a kind of decarbonisation hierarchy that starts with reducing demand as much as you can, whether that's energy efficiency, behaviour change, whatever. Then you electrify. Then you might think, and you do stuff with flexibility and optimization, all the rest of it. And only then do you go to these kind of hydrogen type solutions. And only when you've tried all of that do you get into things like carbon capture or offsetting, I guess is my kind of, and I think it's disingenuous to kind of position that as they're all equal, because they're not. I'm not saying we won't have a role for carbon capture or offsetting, but it needs to be something you do when you can't do anything else.
Yes, and actually, I think you mentioned something that's often falls under the table, which is reducing energy demand. And I think coming back actually to Laura, if she's still in the call, I think one of the things is also that you don't even need to necessarily focus on the technology. I think what is key in the future will also be how to reduce demands for things, for the services we take from energy. How can we approach it differently to have just less demand in some way? Because having the same living standards and behaviors with renewables is for me a crazy challenge. It's a large challenge. So you can make it much easier when you reduce demands wherever possible. So that's what I wanted to underline.
It's part of the heat pump stuff as well. Like, absolute no regret thing for any householder is always to insulate. And unless they do, and if I was in government, I'd pour more and more money into that, to be honest, because it's such a good investment in the future.
Yep.
And then obviously on the industrial scale as well, there's all sorts of energy efficiency things that can be done. But and also behavioural change. We probably don't all. Well, I think those of us who live in London probably drive a lot less than a lot of people in the country. But that kind of investing in public transport and clean transport and all that kind of thing is super important. There was another question that was hydrogen related, wasn't it? Have we covered that?
Yeah, the challenges you see for future for hydrogen in the future, and especially because they basically are working on how certification of basically of green molecules, which poses the challenge of like when is it real green hydrogen, and also to how to create a green hydrogen market, a bit similar like a carbon market, what they did for direct air capture in the end. But yeah, so the question was more the challenges that you see for hydrogen in the future.
Yeah, lots of challenges. I think at the moment we're at, it's just the most, if you look at any projection really, the amount that market needs to grow is just astonishing. So I think there is that kind of, I think the government's done a good job in the last year or two at trying to come up with some hydrogen, some mostly well-designed hydrogen schemes, but not necessarily being able to make the level of investment that we need to get all of them off the ground. So I think it's always talked about the chicken and egg problem in hydrogen. No one's going to commit to change their industrial process until they're sure they're going to get a good supply of green hydrogen. No one's going to produce unless they know they've got an off-taker. So I think we are making progress on that, and there are some good integrated projects, but I think there's a problem, I think probably with domestic heating. I think it muddies the water quite a lot, because I think there are some very clear areas where hydrogen is going to be needed, particularly industrial processes, and probably in the form of kind of e-fuels for shipping, heavy transport, potentially aviation, although I think probably the answer for aviation is everyone needs to fly a lot less before you get anywhere else, but never mind. And I think debating whether hydrogen is useful for domestic properties probably distracts from all of that, to be honest. But I know that obviously there are a lot of people who run gas networks or boiler companies who would probably have a different view.
I think also on this regard, it depends very much how deep you are already in the subject. I think I've been working, especially in my last project in a PhD, and now on hydrogen. And I think the sources that I consult, they're very clear, and that hydrogen has no priority for domestic heating. And that's what I also meant with having a solid technical understanding, and which allows you to question some claims, which you then could simply calculate on a piece of paper, that a heat pump is more efficient and requires way less renewable capacity to be installed than if you need a hydrogen boiler. So it allows you to question some claims, because at the moment there's so much uncertainty how it will evolve, especially like the energy transition, that it's good to have a brain to challenge some of the information, I think. But coming back actually to the career angle, for me, it was because the last conversation I had was with someone who had, like with Bindi, who had a very a journey through different companies around a certain topic of like heat decarbonization and heat networks. And with you, I saw that the journey has been through one company, which in your own words also hasn't been the one company, in a sense, like it has evolved as well. And perhaps my question would have been, what do you see as advantages and disadvantages of having a career, like, or following a career within the same company? What's your perspective on this? Like on
So I certainly wouldn't say that when I joined I expected to stay as long as I have. And I think the reason I have is because I've had the opportunity to do different roles, and to have a variety of roles within the company. I think also, I talked about working with coal stations at the beginning. I think if EDF was still working with coal stations now, that would not be aligned with what motivates me, I suppose. So I don't think it matters to a certain extent. I think what matters is the job you're doing interesting? Are you learning? Is the place you're working aligned with your values, I suppose? So I think, I certainly obviously feel some loyalty to EDF, but I wouldn't say that, I'm definitely never going anywhere else or anything like that. I think I don't think it. I think either can work. I don't think it. If someone says I need to move on every 2 years, or else I'm letting myself down, I think that's a fallacy. But I also think that if I worked with a team if everyone I worked with had also only worked at EDF, we wouldn't be a very good team. So I think some people need to move around, but you need people coming in with fresh ideas. So I certainly wouldn't. I think we need both. It's another form where we need diversity. I think we need people who have got maybe that kind of long memory, but you really need, especially in today's world and with today's challenges, I think it would be lunatic to not have that kind of cross-fertilization of ideas. So it's a bit of a non-answer, but I think I'm not here to say that people who move around a lot are making big mistakes. I don't think they are, but I'm happy with the decisions that I took, I suppose. But it was never a kind of strategy, I suppose. It was just the way it's panned out for me.
Yes, in that sense, I was mostly also curious just to hear how you see it in hindsight, because sometimes you then see also how things come together. For example, as I mentioned, the network, of course, if you're longer in a company and people stay around and they move in different directions, you have always a connection point. You can learn about roles much easier. And because the company as EDF is so big, in that sense, it's also easier to stay, because if you go to different departments, of course, you have different roles and different involvements, and sometimes even mentalities depending on who's there. So and then I would agree that it's very, the mix that you underlined is actually very important, in a sense that having people that know the company and how it has evolved is sometimes very helpful to also understand why it's not going in some directions, and what the priorities are, like a bit of a mentality, and then the freshness comes in to challenge them in some way. Because not everything that has stayed over years is nonsense, but sometimes it's perhaps outdated. And so if it's challenged, it might be
absolutely.
So, and I actually, how did it then come around that you moved to R&D? Because you underlined as well that it was a big step. And I was wondering how that came about, and how did you actively seek also a very different challenge and different environment, or
I was definitely very ready for a new role. So I suppose I spoke to a few people to try and understand what might be an interesting change in direction for me. So I think it came from I guess what I call a kind of credible network. So it wasn't just that I knew some senior people from different departments, but that they knew and they'd seen my work, and they thought I had the talent to do this big change, I suppose. Which I guess probably comes to the heart of your previous question about networking, is that, it's not about how many people you know, it's about how much do they want to kind of cheerlead for you, I suppose. So that was, I wouldn't say that I got up one morning and thought I definitely want to work in R&D. Well, I did once I saw the job being advertised, but I think it was I was really ready for a new challenge. So I guess within EDF, jobs are advertised. So, I had to go through a process of applying for it, but it was, I guess, with some knowledge that there was, I had some kind of credibility that went beyond my CV. And I think also, to be fair, what they wanted in the role was, it's very important, I think, for us in R&D, is to have that, like, we're not a university. We are here to be close to the business, to understand business challenges. So, I think within R&D as well, there is a real goal, and certainly my boss has it, and I have it, and the other managers do, which is to have a mixture of maybe people coming straight from academia, people who've been in the team for a long time, maybe they've come over from France or internationally, and people who've transferred in from the business units. And we really believe that is a strong and diverse team, I suppose. And you could have an R&D team full of academics, and I'm sure they do some great work, but they wouldn't necessarily be able to make it land in the business the way that we managed to with our mixed team. But then we also need that kind of academic rigor coming in as well.
Yes, I think this underlines also very well where I personally see the difference then in the R&D in universities and basically in this protected professor-student relationship in some way, and then R&D in a company, in a sense that the business always matters. And I think that's why I would also encourage people that enjoy new ideas, new concepts, but they like the application and they like what to do with it next. I think that then R&D in a company is greatly enjoyable, because it is perhaps taking, of course, a bit away the long-term angle. Like, you're not looking at 2035, you might be looking at 2028, but you might get real inputs like concerns from customers and relationships. Like, you get real information from tangible problems as well. And the question is always matter. Does it work as a business? So that's a very nice angle. So I think having the mix between the academia and the people that have been in different units at your company, that's very interesting approach. And then, because you said you talk to people, I was wondering, how often do you seek external feedback? Is that something that is, I don't know, that was specific in this circumstance, or is that something you have always done? How do you seek, handle feedback, seek feedback, etc.?
So I think it is really important to get feedback, and I think it comes to that kind of point of wanting to have quality relationships with people. So I think it's always about trying to understand what me and what the team can do better. And I think definitely, do I proactively ask someone for feedback every day? No, but I do try to, really listen to what people are saying and what are the kind of the signals they're trying to give me. And then, as I said before, I think people are always willing, if you take the time to go and ask them for advice, feedback, whatever. I've never really had an experience where people haven't been willing to give me their time. So I think it is super important. It's a difficult thing to get to the top of your to-do list, because it's always a bit uncomfortable and no one really likes it. But I think it like everything else, it's a muscle, and the more that you ask people for that, the more you can learn. I think what's always really important to me as a manager is feedback from my team. What am I doing? Because I know that they're probably the people who know me the best as well.
Yeah. And they also the ones that work with you the closest, probably, and besides the ones basically you are delivering to. So you have the greatest impact with adopting feedback on those people, I think, like taking it in.
Yeah.
And because you mentioned it's sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say I'm nothing without my team. So, it's really important to me that they feel that they give that feedback and that they feel listened to. And sometimes, it's big companies. Sometimes I have the power to change things that they want me to change, and sometimes I don't. But I always do my best to listen.
Yeah, giving people a voice. And as you mentioned, also the feedback is a muscle. I think if you ask feedback regularly, you can't be surprised about it too much anymore. Like, it's good to know, like, if you only do it every 10 years, then you might be very surprised and perhaps hurt. But I think if you keep a realistic picture of yourself, you also know your edges. And it's not about ironing them out, but it's good to know what they are in the end. So I'm sorry, it's already 59, so I need to come to the closing part, the closing remarks of this session. And I think, first of all, of course, I thank you, Rebecca, very, very much. Thank you for your time. Thank you for all the answers and your perspective. And then, of course, I would also thank everyone that asked questions and everyone that listened in. And you're very welcome to join the next session and post your questions. The more the merrier is the rule. And otherwise, the recording of this event will be available on our YouTube channel. And we, of course, would encourage that you share the recording with anyone that you think would benefit of it. And I hope you will join us again soon. And see you at the next event of the Energy Futures Lab. Thank you,
and
Rebecca.
Please do feel free, if any of you would like to kind of get in touch. I think we might be recruiting soon, so please do feel free to get in touch.
Perfect. Good. Have a good afternoon.
Thank you very much. Have a lovely weekend, everyone.
Bye.